So having looked at Jade's case study regarding wanting a glute focused program, a number of you will have gone slightly overboard with the amount of volume that we give to her. And that's a natural thing to do. But what I wanted to do is actually go over this very recent study from July 2022 regarding volume increases and what that can mean for muscle growth, which is going to be really useful for us when it comes to specialization or bias plans that we're looking at now, but we will also look at again when it comes to planning and periodization. So this study, as you can see from the name of the title, looked at progressive resistance training volumes and its effect on basically muscle size. So they looked at 3 different training volumes and then only on the lower body, and they looked at muscle thickness, muscle mass gain, how hard the training sessions were, etc. So they had 3 different set configurations. They had 12 sets, 18 sets, and 24 sets over 3 days per week. So the subjects, they started with 45 subjects, 10 of them dropped out, but they were student age, so between 18 to 30 years of age, and they were relatively well trained, right? They had a 1.5 times body weight back squat, which I think is quite interesting. So, if they weigh 100 kg, they could squat 150 kg. So it's quite cool. If they're 80 kg, they could squat 120. So it's not bad. It's probably what we'd see at least with our kind of Gen Pop clients. Now, what was also interesting within this study was that they took note of the previous training volumes. So PSN is the previous number of sets performed per week. And this has been largely overlooked in a lot of the research. And so if, for example, I had been doing 12 sets per week and I was put in the 18 set group in this study, then I would have actually increased my training load relatively by 50% or absolutely by 6 sets, right? I was doing 12, now I'm doing 18. However, if I'd previously been doing 20 sets and you put me in the 18 set group, I'm now doing 2 less sets than I would have done before. So for one individual, despite them both doing 18 sets per week, one individual had quite largely increased their training volume whilst another one had decreased it. And that can, of course, muddy the waters in terms of outcomes. So they looked into this, which is really, really good. And what they tried to do is make sure that each group had roughly the same average number of sets performed per week. So we can see here that the 12 set group on average before the study were doing 13.5 sets. The 18 set group was nearly doing 14 to 13.8, and the 24 set group, they were a little bit lower, and that was 12 sets per week. And so on average, the people in the 12 set group went from doing 13.5 sets per week to only doing 12 now, so it was a slight reduction of 1.5 sets. The 18 set group went from nearly 14 sets to 18 sets, so they added on 4 more sets. And then the lunatics in the 24 set group actually went from 12 sets and nearly doubled that, right? So of the individuals in the 12 set group, over half, so 8 out of the 13 individuals were actually doing slightly less volume than before. In the 18 set group, only 3 individuals were doing less volume than before. So, 9 out of the 12 individuals in that group either did the same or more volume than they were previously doing. And then everybody bar one lunatic in the 24 set group was doing more work. So this means that one individual was actually doing more than 24 sets per week for their quads, which is obviously quite a lot. But it's really important that they captured that information. Now, in terms of the training program, pretty solid stuff that we would hopefully like to see in terms of the training frequency. So they train body parts twice per week. It was 8 weeks long. All sets were pushed relatively close to failure, so 2 reps in reserve, and the last set was taken to failure. And what you can see is they just slightly varied the number of sets per exercise. So whilst day 1 and 2 are pretty similar, weeks 1 to 4 and 5 to 8 were ever so slightly different. What we can basically see if we just look at the top numbers, if I was in the 12 set group, I do 3 sets of 6 to 8 back squat, the last set being taken to failure, 3 sets of 6 to 8 leg press, and then I did a little bit of hamstring work, 2 sets of 4, just to kind of maintain. However, if I was in the 18 set group, I'd do 4 and 5 sets. And if I was in the 24 set group, I'd do 6 sets of both exercises. So you can see how they keep the exercise the same, they just added sets to it. They had 2 minutes rest between sets, which is slightly on the low end, but it's probably on what is acceptable. We've seen studies, Brad Jones has 45 sets per week where they had like 60 seconds rest. So this is quite good. And then they had 3 minutes between rests. Obviously, this makes the 24 set group sessions much longer, but neither by nor by. So here we have firstly the improvements in strength, and all groups improved their strength pretty well, but maybe surprisingly, it was the 18 set per week group that actually increased the most relative amount, so increased by about 25 kilograms compared to 18 kilos in the 12 set group and only 10 kilos or 9.5 kilos in the 24 set group. But of course, the relative increase was also the best. So the best strength increases came from the 18 set group, followed by the 12 set group and then the 24 set group. So this idea, just add, and the guys doubling in their volume, they saw the worst improvements in strength. Then when we look at the fat-free mass, so how much muscle they gained around the quads that they were looking up for, or the thighs, the 12 set group, now we have to remember the 12 set group on average were doing slightly less volume than before, but they still gained about 1.2 kilos of muscle, around about 5%. The 18 set group that had added on 4 sets, they increased by about 4.2% or 1 kilo. And the 24 set group, they still grew, but they grew the least. And this should be, this really does fly in the face of this idea that we just have to do more is better, more sets equals more hypertrophy, because the guys here that actually did the least amount of work gained the most amount of muscle. And there is an inverse relationship here actually between the number of sets somebody does and how much they improved. So this was the conclusion. We've not confirmed our hypothesis, as our main finding demonstrated similar increases in muscle mass and thickness across the experimental group. So it didn't matter if you did 12, 18 or 24 sets, it was similar results. There was also a strong trend for the 18 set group being more effective in increasing maximum strength than the 24 set group. And training volume had an inverted U pattern, as 12 and 24 sets likely produce suboptimal adaptation. So when they were looking at both hypertrophy and strength combined, the 18 set group appeared to do better than the 12 group or the 18 group. So this idea that they're, maybe a little bit more is better, but too much doesn't mean better again, suntan, sunburn type stuff. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because they started to look at the individual differences of the individuals. And so what we can see here is we have on the left hand side the 1 rep max squat for the 12 set group, the 18 set group and the 24 set group, and each line is the pre and post study results for each individual. So of all the individuals in the 12 set group, we can see a dot on the left hand side, then the line, and then another dot. Now if that line is sloping upwards, that means their 1 rep max strength improved over the course of the study. If it's kind of flat, it means they've kind of maintained what they had. And obviously if it's a downward slope, so the left-hand dot is higher than the right-hand dot, that means they actually lost a little bit of strength. Now the same thing is true for muscle thickness, changes in muscle thickness, and area of interest or region of interest fat-free mass, which is of course the thigh. And what we can see is quite varying degrees of strength improvements and muscle thickness. And regardless of if it's 12, 18 or 24 sets, in every single group, there's some individuals that improved, there's some individuals that did okay, and there's some individuals that may have potentially lost a little bit, which leads to a really interesting question. Why is that? So why did some individuals improve and others not? Well, when looking at the muscle mass, they found that what they did is they break, regardless of what group you're in, they said, are you a non-responder, pretty much, which is what they call the first tercile? Are you a moderate responder, which is the second tercile, or are you a high responder, which is the third tercile? And so they looked at that no matter what, if you're in the 12, 18 or 24 set group, they said, have you improved a lot? If you have, you're in the third tercile. If you're in the 12, 18 or 24 set group, have you improved a little bit? You're in the second tercile. And if you're one of those individuals that hasn't improved at all, regardless of what set group you are, you're in the first tercile. And what they found was that the individuals that had made moderate to high responders who made decent gains appeared to add in a few more sets from their previous training. So it wasn't that they'd gone from double the sets or maybe less sets, but what we can see here is the individuals that typically didn't do much, they'd gone from 15 sets to adding in 1.8 sets, so 2 sets, so from 15 to 12, 17 sets, they hadn't really improved much. However, when individuals made a relatively modest increase, so the second tercile went from 13 sets per week to 17 sets per week, as did the third tercile group. They went from 11 sets per week up to 17 or 18 sets per week. They tended to make the best gains. So what does this mean? Differences in work performed measured by the number of weekly sets did not impact the gains in muscle thickness. So we can't just say on an average size, just adding in more sets means you're going to get more body mass or more strength. And there appeared to be a ceiling effect. So despite going from between 12 to 24 sets and doubling the amount of kilograms they lifted, there was no real difference in the gains that somebody got. However, when we looked at that individual basis, the effects of increasing weekly sets proportionately to what somebody was doing appeared to provide a better insight on the varying training volumes and hypertrophy. So what does this mean? We have to account for what our clients have been previously doing. We can't just say more is better. We saw that even when individuals went from 12 sets up to 24 sets, they doubled their volume. They slightly improved, but not by much. The ones that appeared to improve the most were the ones that had a relative increase on what they were doing. So yes, it's kind of true on both fronts in that doing more work didn't on average appear to improve people's results. However, when somebody was put in a place in the group that allowed them to do slightly more work than they had been doing previously, from 4 to 6 sets more than they had been doing previously, that appeared to allow them to respond the best. So what does this mean for us with our slots method? Well, for bias plans, maybe going from 2 or 3 slots all the way up to 4 or 5 slots could maximize our gains. So it's not that we need to take somebody straight up to the top end of that 20 sets per week and throw the kitchen sink at them. If your client is currently only doing 2 exercises per week, let's say, for a certain body part, maybe taking them up 1 or even 2 slots more could be enough for your biased or specialized plan. And then this starts to give us a bit of a blueprint in terms of if you have a client with no specific body part goal, then it may be prudent to spend times where we increase the number of slots for a certain exercise and reduce it for others, and then over the course of a number of training blocks we cycle through. So for 1 or 2 training blocks, vertical pulling slots are higher and vertical pushing slots are lower. Then in the 2 blocks after that, we flip it, and we could do that for quads, so we could do it for hamstrings. Now, we don't have to do it all the time, but it gives us a bit of an idea that we don't have to throw the kitchen sink at somebody and go, okay, let's go from 12 sets to 24. It could be a case of going from 6 to 10, or for us, 2 exercise slots to 3 exercise slots, and still being able to specialize.